Hi there. So as Amey said, my name is Sascha from Helvoort, and I'm veterinary head for outbreak delivery within APHA. And we're having a very busy season indeed. So for the first case, so situation update, obviously we had our first case all the way not that long ago, on the 26th of August 2024, and that was in sheep with clinical signs of Bluetongue. Very different to last season, where obviously we picked it up on surveillance and where the animals didn't show clinical signs. We currently have 38 confirmed premises to date, and with the last disclosure of the case, the temporary control zone, with the disclosure of cases down in Norfolk, the temporary control zone was quickly followed by a restrictor zone, which includes Norfolk, Suffolk, and Essex. Then 4th of September, there was a temporary control zone in up north and in the East Riding area, and that was due to a bovine animal. And yesterday we confirmed a further case, so that means there the temporary control zone has been extended a bit further into the south, as you can see from the picture on the right. This is the link to be able to get to the web, the control map, and that's also a handy tool to use to find out where your premise is. So if you're not totally sure if you're in a restricted zone or in a temporary control zone, you can put your CPH or your postcode into that tool, and that will show you where you are. Operationally, we continue to undertake report cases. They are still coming in every day. So these are report cases of clinical signs of the disease of Bluetongue. We're also doing tracing visits, which are related to any positive cases we've had. So we'll always trace animals should they have left that premise prior to the zones having been put in place, because as you're aware, once you're in a zone, all movements are restricted. And we are also doing a lot of surveillance visits to understand where disease is. So we're concentrating along the edges of these restricted zones. We do encourage livestock keepers again to correctly register if they have temporary land. It is quite complicated, but there is a lot of good guidance on gov.uk, so please do look there, because it is a clear step-to-step guidance on what to do. Also, should we visit your farm for surveillance, we're not visiting all farms in the zone, it's a selection of farms. What we do is we will be sampling up to 35 cattle, and they'll be above 6 months of age. So if you have, say, 30 cattle, then we will sample 30 cattle. If you've got 100, we'll sample 35. So movement controls and licenses, and Andy will say a bit more about this also quite quickly, but there is a general license, but there are also specific licenses. So just to understand that you might not get a license at the end of it, it is got to do with risks, and we look at that. So just to be aware that could happen. And it's complex and high-risk moves that really take the licensing team a lot of time. Even though we will try and issue the licenses within 5 working days, sometimes it could take longer, so be aware of that. Also to note that you can request free sampling via a VDP vet should you want a licensed move, but you equally could use your own private vet at your cost. Testing is always free. And if you do suspect Bluetongue, please, this is a reminder, this is our number, the 03000 number, please do call us. You do have to notify any suspicion of notifiable disease. And so now that was a really quick recap, and I will hand over to Andy.
Thanks, Sascha. Yes, I'm Andy Smith. I lead on livestock disease policy and exotic disease policy team in Defra. Next slide, please, Sascha. Whoever's controlling the slides. Thank you. Yeah, so I think Sascha's covered this already, but the restricted control, the restricted zone is in place, covers Norfolk, Suffolk, and Essex. That hasn't changed recently. But as Sascha's already said, the temporary control zone in the East Riding area of Yorkshire has been extended yesterday to cover a slightly wider area particularly along the coast there. And within those zones there are restrictions on the movement of animals and some licenses which I'll come on to in a second. And just really to highlight that if any of your premises are partly in the zone, so they're on the boundary, they are considered to be wholly within the relevant zone. Next slide, please, Sascha. Thank you. So I was just going to say a couple of words about what the restrictions are. So within these Bluetongue zones, I've put restricted zones and temporary control zones together in this slide. The restrictions and the license requirements are really identical. Just some of the measures in the restricted zone don't technically need a license. So in terms of moving to slaughter from premises within the zones, you can move to slaughter if you're located in the zone and the slaughterhouse is within the zone. That's within a restricted or a temporary control zone. There's no requirement for the slaughterhouse to be designated. So that's close to business as usual. We are asking the slaughterhouses to take sensible precautions in terms of measures, etc. In terms of the other movements, again, animals can move essentially freely within the restricted zones and within the temporary control zones where a general license has been published. So that's moved between premises, into and out of markets, and into slaughterhouses. So almost free movement there. What can't happen is movements out of markets, out of the zone, but they can move within the zone. I'll come on to that. So shows and gatherings can operate, so free movement within that zone, but at the moment no licenses to move out of the zone from those premises. So the key requirement there is if there is any clinical signs on any animals being moved, please don't move them. We don't want to knowingly move disease around those zones. So that's a plea and a requirement where there's a license. In terms of germinal products, again, there is free movement of germinal products around those zones, but there is a ban on the freezing of germinal products on premises within restricted or temporary control zones, but those activities can be allowed by license or if the premises is designated. Next slide, please. So in terms of moving animals and things out of the zone, animals can be moved under a general license to direct to a designated slaughterhouse outside the zone. That slaughterhouse can be in England and Wales. Essentially, the key criteria are ensuring your vehicle has been sprayed with insecticide prior to loading of the animals, that they arrive for slaughter between 1 hour after sunrise and 2 hours before sunset, and there's a few other relatively straightforward conditions in the license. Markets, I'm afraid, within the restricted and temporary control zones I've just said, can move direct to slaughter using that license, but they can't move out to live. So they can use that license to move to immediate slaughter at a designated slaughterhouse. The general license applies to any premises except for those that have been served specific restriction notices preventing movements on and off. And in terms of all other movements, I've probably said this several times, you can now apply for a license to move animals out of the restricted zones and temporary control zones to move directly to another premises outside those zones. That's through a specific license. But I'm afraid in terms of moving animals purchased at market, they can't move directly out. They could move to another premises in the zone, undertake some pre-movement testing, and then move. Sorry, I meant to say in that first sentence, the moves out of that zone do require pre-movement testing and post-movement testing, which can be organised through our farm care contacts to obtain the sampling, or you can use your own private vet at your cost, and the testing is provided for free. Germinal products, again, they need a license, and essentially the destination, if it's untreated, unfrozen, or doesn't meet any of the testing requirements for the donor animal, then it needs to go to a germinal product collection centre that's been designated outside the zone. But product can be moved out for use on other farms if the donor animals have been tested and the product's frozen, or if it was produced before a certain date, and there's some details on the web pages about that. Thanks, Sascha. So, and the next one. So I was going to briefly talk about where we are on vaccine and vaccination. This is all very recent, so some of the information is still emerging in terms of the actual licenses and publication, but to confirm that the Secretary of State for Defra has now approved 3 Bluetongue vaccines that are quite widely used in Europe at the moment. So that permit allows the importation of those products, and suppliers are actively now preparing to import those products. That's set out in the 3 vaccine permits I've just displayed there. So those are the 3 products you can see names of. And there's some summary of product characteristics also published, which explains what the claims are for those products. That's all available online. The initial licenses for the use of those products, so that the first bit is just about permitting the import. The second is about the use of the products. There will be a general license published. If it's not published today, it will be very shortly, which will allow vaccination under that general license within any of the high-risk counties, which is essentially Norfolk down to East Sussex. And anyone outside of those areas can apply for a specific license to access the vaccine. There are, we understand, no current plans in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland for permitting the use of the vaccine or allowing the use under license of their vaccine in their territories. There is also going to be some specific advisory note provided to veterinarians to provide a bit more information about this, and also to sort of seek feedback on the use and performance of the products. Next one, please. So I think just to mention some key features, the Bluetongue vaccine claims have been set out and by the manufacturers in those product characteristics. Unlike the Bluetongue 8 vaccines, then they're not claiming full protective immunity, but they are claiming reductions in viremia. Essentially, that means animals can still become infected or infectious, and their claims will include things like reduction or prevention of some clinical signs and or mortality. So they have value in terms of animal health. What they're not providing is full immunity, and therefore, unfortunately, they aren't sufficient to give immediate access to export to trade or for exiting some of the control zones. So effectively, for a disease control perspective, vaccinated and unvaccinated animals will be treated the same. And to obtain more information about this, it is work, please, with your veterinarians. They will need to prescribe it, but it can be administered by keepers. The animals should be identified to confirm which animals have and haven't been vaccinated. And we're asking for updates from vets on how that has been, the uptake of that. On this latter part, I think there will be more information coming out to the veterinary practices and through the vet routes in the next few days. So I think some of these aspects will become much clearer by after the weekend. I think that's it from me, Sascha. Is there any more? Nope.
No, that was it.
So sorry, it was a little longer run through than perhaps you wanted, but I just wanted to cover the kind of the movement rules, because that probably answers some of the questions, and just give you the heads up on where we are with vaccination now. Thanks.
Thank you very much to both of you. Hopefully you can hear me a bit better now. Can Sascha or Andy indicate you can hear me? Hopefully, yeah, I've changed a few things, so yeah, should be better. Thank you. So we have had quite a few questions come in, if you're happy to answer them now. So I'll start off with this one. So given that rare breed breeders need to go to specialist markets rather than a local general market, what is the situation regarding out of area to rare?
Amey,
So
your
this
microphone.
is especially urgent since out annual
Amey,
rare next week.
Amey, your microphone again isn't working.
Not hear us.
Well, really broken up.
Okay. Alan, would you be able to jump in and ask? Alan, 1 second.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi. I don't have all of Amy's questions, so if you wouldn't mind sending ones over, Amey, if you can, I will get through some of the ones that I have here, if that's okay. So the first one I had through was, are all 38 confirmed premises as a result of passive surveillance only, or does that include some active surveillance?
No, well, yeah, so these are mainly passive surveillance, so mainly via report cases. I mean, yeah, and there are a few that we have found via the surveillance we're doing in the zones.
Okay, next one.
Sorry, it's probably worth saying a lot of those are through, a lot of those passive ones are through clinical presentation, which is probably obvious, but it's probably worth emphasising that there are clinical signs in a number of these, as opposed to just being through testing.
Yeah, so also either reported by the farmers themselves or owners by themselves or via the private vet.
Okay. Are there plans for the BTV3 vaccine to be developed with similar efficacy as the BTV8 vaccine? I understand that the current BTV3 vaccine only reduces severity of disease rather than controls spread.
Yeah, I suppose I'll start with that and I'll let Andy finish. I mean, it is really difficult. This is a different serotype, so it acts differently than the other viruses, and as we've seen, it's a lot. The clinical signs are really different in the sheep. They're a lot more severe. The vaccine is what it is, but I'm assuming that it's up to the manufacturers to whether they change things or they keep things going. But Andy might have a bit more information on that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard to speak on behalf of the manufacturers directly. I think in the short term, I think it's unlikely those vaccines are going to change very significantly. Obviously, they'll be taking feedback from the field experiences, and I'm sure if subject to being demand for the product, they will be working towards sort of full marketing authorizations for these products, which will allow them to gather more data, and they could well modify the product to improve performance. At this stage, it's very hard to tell how well each product is performing. So there may well be some that are given very good coverage, and some that might be able to improve before we don't have individual information on those products. But in terms of the next steps, I think in the short term it's unlikely there'll be a significant change in those products, but longer term I'm sure manufacturers will be looking to improve their products.
I think it's important to add, I mean, even though this doesn't give full protection, it definitely does alleviate the clinical signs. So we've seen in Holland, there's definitely less mortality, and also animals seem to get better a lot quicker. So yes, it doesn't give full protection, but it's beneficial for animal welfare and trying to fight this disease.
Okay, so given that the rare breeders need to go to specialist markets rather than the local general market, what is the situation regarding issuing movement licenses out of restricted area to rare breed markets, especially urgent since Melton Mowbray's annual rare breed show and sale is in 2 days?
So at the moment, movement licenses out to markets aren't available to live. I think if there's, in terms of sales direct to individual buyers, that's something that can be licensed, but into the markets, I'm afraid it can't be licensed at the moment. We are working with the Livestock Auctioneers Association and others to try and find ways that we can authorise those movements into markets. We're conscious there's will be demand for that, but it's not something that's practical, or the risk can be controlled at the moment. The risk of spread can be controlled at the moment.
Yes.
And I would just add as well that I think pre-movement testing will be a condition of whether it's a movement direct to a premises or in future via a market. So there will need to be some pre-movement testing done on animals leaving those zones. Thanks.
Can animals move into the zone from a market without a license?
So they aren't technically into the restricted zone. Yes, they don't need a license to move in. Into the temporary control zone, they do need a license, but that is being published as a general license. So that is published at the moment. So the effect is the same. You can move in from a market into those zones without a license.
Okay. Given we are importing vaccines and that the vaccines that are to be used are being used in Europe, do you foresee either supply difficulties or unfair pricing inflation into the UK market?
I don't think I can comment on the pricing element, because obviously that's a commercial aspect. We are working hard with the manufacturers to ensure the supply is secured for the UK, and certainly they've been very supportive so far, that they're all pushing to get supply. And in fact, I think some manufacturers might already have supply in the country. So I can't. They're certainly pushing towards that. Clearly, if there's a very huge demand for it here and abroad, the manufacturers will be working hard to meet all of those demands. But at the moment, it looks like supply will be okay for the moment, depending on take up.
Okay. Sorry, they're a little bit back and forth, the questions, but I'm just kind of reading them as they came in. So, what is the protocol for the post-movement testing? I can only find details on pre-movement testing.
Correct. It's probably worth clarifying that as well. I think there's published online is I think it's called free testing out of high risk counties, and that's applicable to premises that are in one of the high risk counties. I say from Kent round to East Sussex at the moment. However, it doesn't apply if you are in a restricted zone or a temporary control zone for that matter, because a license is needed. So the free testing you can read online does describe the protocols for moving out of those high risk counties if you choose and want to take advantage of that test before moving your animals. That's available. I can explain roughly what happens in terms of a license. So the process is to all of these moves out of zones to live will be a specific license. So you would apply to the APHA outbreak licensing portal, and as part of processing that application, they'll obviously check the validity of it, make sure it looks a sound move. Assuming that license is authorized, you will then have access to organize a vet to come and sample through the, I've forgotten the name of the company, but it's the Veterinary Delivery Partnership. So it can organise a call from them to come and sample your animals. That would be the cost of that would be picked up by government, and the samples would be submitted and tested, and the results would be passed back, and that testing would be free. In terms of the movement would then take place, they would be restricted to the destination premises where they'll stay, and will again require the keeper there to organise post-movement testing in the 6 to 10 days after arrival through the same process. So they would apply and request a vet to visit and take those samples. Those moving or those licensees wanting to move could use their own private vets as an alternative to that, but that would be at their cost. So there's not a ban on using your own private vet, but if you want to take advantage of the free sampling, then that would be through that route. So hopefully that outlines it. I think it's probably more detail in terms of exactly what samples are taken and how to go through that process. We'll make that available to those that are using or have got a license.
So within a TCZ, how long after the last case is detected would you expect it to be lifted? I know that's quite an optimistic question.
Yeah, it's the $1 million question. Clearly, at the moment, we're undertaking further surveillance. I think first of all we need to establish. At the moment, we haven't identified any circulation in the TCZ up in Yorkshire, but we've obviously already picked up a second case, which seems to be again an independent incursion. But we will be doing further surveillance up there to determine the next steps. I think, if we were to find circulating disease, then that zone is likely to change into something different, probably a restricted zone of some sort. So I think the exit from the temporary control zone is a little way off, in that we need to complete that surveillance first, and then we'll be looking at what the exit criteria will be for that zone. So I think it's a very hard one to sum up until we see the scale of
Yes.
disease in the area.
Is there a list of recommended insecticides for the use of vehicles before and after transport?
So there isn't a specified list. I think I've forgotten the name of the active ingredients again. So in terms of insecticides, what basically we recommend purchasing from your usual suppliers of these kind of products. Seek their advice. Any insecticide for sale in the UK should have been approved by the Health and Safety Executive, so all products should be safe to be used. We're saying use one, ideally, that's approved for control of coolicoidal midges. I think we're well aware that I think there's maybe only one that's formally approved for that purpose. So we're happy if it's a product that's approved for use on biting flies. And there's 2 active ingredients, which I'm afraid I'll have to look up again because I've completely forgotten them. But there's 2 active ingredients which are very good for controlling this kind of midge. So those are the products we'd recommend. But I think it's talk to your usual suppliers for these kind of products, and they should be able to guide you in which ones. There are published lists from the HSE which do show all the approved products, but it's quite a hard list to work through. So it's probably easiest to talk to your normal suppliers.
Yeah, so definitely speak to your SQPs. They are trained for this, and they'll be able to give you the right advice there.
And I'll confirm the active ingredients in a minute when I've looked them up again. So sorry about that.
Under the specific license, is it going to be possible to move? I know you might have answered these questions already, sorry, but
okay.
Is it going to be possible to move animals from an infected holding which have been blood tested as a negative to BTV3 movement within the zone? Does that make sense? Within the zone, it says.
Yeah. So I'll just talk briefly then just about restricted premises. So restricted ones are where we've confirmed disease, or we suspect that there has been disease present, through a tracing or the signs of it. So they're prohibited from moving animals on or off.
Okay.
We certainly will be able to license things onto the premises, and we'll be able to license things off to a slaughterhouse. So those kind of moves can be licensed. The question of moves from the premises to live, that is possible. You need to apply for a license, and we'd look at those on a case-by-case basis. So, for instance, a move from one part of your holding to perhaps some temporary land could certainly be allowed, depending on the location and depending on whether we needed testing to give ourselves the reassurance the animals weren't infected at the time. So I can't give a a definite yes, it would be allowed. I think it'd be looked at on a case-by-case basis, but it's not a no for those kind of movements within a zone. Moving out of a zone will be much more difficult because we certainly don't want to move infected animals out of that area. Again, so I think the answer is if you're wanting to do that, speak early to your contact for that APHA contact for that premises. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sascha, about the approach?
I think if you do want to do a move, to go via the licensing hub, so on gov.uk, and apply there, and they will do undertake the risk assessment, and either a license will be issued or not. So they will have to risk assess that.
How long does it take to get a general license? I currently live outside the links TCZ, but have animals booked to go to a slaughter later in September, but may be inside by the time they're moved. If that makes sense.
So there's two types of license. The general license is published online, and perhaps I should have explained this earlier. The general license is published. It sets out what is being allowed, and if what is being allowed is what you want to do, then you can take advantage of that general license without having to do any application. You do need to comply with the conditions of the license, so it will set out what you need to do in moving those animals. So if you're moving into a temporary control zone for slaughter, then that license sets out what you need to do in doing that move. So there is a license, I think, published for that particular kind of move from outside into the zone. If it's a specific license, you need to apply to APHA through the licensing centre, and they will then, in issuing the license, give the sort of detailed instructions of how to go about the move, assuming it's approved. So the general one, you don't need to apply, you just need to comply with it if it applies to you.
And just for the licensing hub, that is a very straightforward and easy to follow process, but there obviously are people out there that don't have internet access, and so there is an email address if you just have an email, but there is also a phone number for those people that really don't have any access to computers. So just to mention that as well.
If the BTV positive animals are being euthanized, and if the vaccines only reduce the severity, would the vaccinated animal be culled if tested positive, or be allowed to live and see if it gets better?
So I think that depends where we are in a zone, where we are in terms of the situation. I would say generally in the current restricted zone, we have confirmed circulation of Bluetongue, and culling animals in that situation doesn't give very much disease control benefit. So in almost all cases, it's very unlikely we're going to be killing any animals in that zone as a disease control measure. So whether it's vaccinated or not, in that area, we're not likely to be killing. I mean, obviously the vaccine might actually reduce the clinical impacts and actually help it recover more quickly, but it wouldn't change our policy in that area. In the temporary control zone at the moment in Yorkshire, we don't have circulating disease, and we have culled on the two premises, culled the individual animals. Again, that's simply because there isn't circulating disease, and we don't want onward spread from those animals, given it's not spreading or no signs that it's spreading in that area at the moment. So I think the decision on if that animal had been vaccinated or not vaccinated, whether the culling decision would be any different, I think would have to be on a case-by-case basis, probably decided by the CVO. And it's probably to extend the conversation, if we were to detect a case in a completely clean area, the Midlands, wherever, I think, again, we wouldn't be known to have disease in that area. We would be considering whether or not to cull it and whether that would offer any benefit. It would really depend on how we thought disease had got there. So again, it's a decision the CVO would take, taking account of all the veterinary and epidemiological advice, the details of the particular case, and any information we have about how disease might have arrived there.
Are you able to comment on which of the 3 vaccines have been most successful in the Netherlands?
No. In short, I not because I don't want to, but simply because I don't think we know. Yeah,
I think it would be for your private vet, maybe to discuss with colleagues in Europe on what their findings are. That would be the best way.
Yeah, I don't think there's any published evidence, and I certainly haven't seen any evidence of the difference in performance. So, but there might well be, you know, hearsay out there as to which one's better, and there might be some other evidence that people have, you know, through their own networks.
What's the plan going forward now that we have confirmed cases pushing north?
So in terms of those cases that moved into the TCZ, I think I've just said that we are doing further surveillance to try and establish whether or not there is further spread or circulation of disease there. So it's a little bit of a wait and see. As we get that further evidence, we'll be able to make a decision. You know, if we do find circulating disease, there will be discussions around, you know, whether to convert those particular TCZs into an individual restricted zone, whether that would need to be larger, and all of those decisions will have to take account of what we find. I'd say in terms of making those decisions, obviously there's the disease control benefits of it, but we'll also be working through the Livestock Core Group, who's a number of industry bodies that work with us to try and take the broad opinions of the pros and cons of that. So not just from a disease control perspective, but also from a simplifying business perspective. So for instance, those in the zones that covers Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex, there is, you know, essentially free movement between those premises. So that's, you know, having an area like that actually can enable more business without restrictions, but clearly creates a bigger border. So there's those wanting to move out would have more difficulty. So there's a very difficult balance in terms of disease control and the right side of those zones. So there isn't a strategy set out for that. Suspicion it moves north. We've got to see what evidence comes up and then take account of the specifics of those areas.
How and where will you be able to check when the vaccines are available to me to use in my area?
So I think it's talk to your private vet. I think they're in the country. The licenses are only literally just being released. So I think in terms of veterinary practices becoming more informed about this, I think probably after the weekend, but they will be much better informed. The veterinary practice will be able to check availability through the warehousing routes. At the moment, I can't tell you which of the manufacturers are using which routes of supply into wholesalers, etc. So, but I think that will become clear as the products arrive. So the veterinarians should be able to access that through their usual routes.
We are getting closer to getting through them, so forgive me. How long does the virus remain in an animal, and how long does it affect them clinically? How long can they infect a midge for? Is the kind of main question.
Well, that's a lot of questions in one.
Yes.
But so what happens is you have an infected midge, and that could bite an animal. The animal then gets infected. So one infected midge can literally kill a sheep. Then another midge can come and bite that animal, which then infects it. Then there's anywhere between 4 to 20 days for the virus to become infectious in that midge, and then it can bite another animal and infect that. So it's quite a quick cycle. Clinical signs, they can happen. There's also a wide, several days there, but anywhere between, I think 8 to 12 days, or 6 to 8 days after being bitten, can they show clinical signs. But it is, there's a bit of a gap there.
Might be worth just saying that in terms of them becoming infectious, it can be detected sooner than that through testing. But there is also potentially, if it's not highly viremic, it can take up to 6 days to detect it in tests as well. So,
and also to note, this is temperature dependent. So there needs to be the temperature needs to be above 12 degrees for the virus to actually fulfill its cycle within the midge that has bitten the infected animal. So when the days get colder, there will be a point that the midges can no longer do this. So there will be an low vector season. That varies year on year. It can be several months, but it can also be really quick. I'm not quite sure. I remember, Andy, it was about 2 months or something this year, but it was a short period.
It was very late this year. I think it was 8th of January, which we confirmed later in January, but it was from the 8th of January. I think it's also worth saying now in relation to that 12 degrees that once a midge is infected, it's always infectious until it dies. So if it takes a meal from an animal today, it could go and take another meal later. So even though we could be below 12 degrees, as long as they're still biting, they can still be infecting animals. So if we had a large population of infectious midges, that 12 degrees isn't the only kind of trigger to stop circulation. It slows or stops the cycle within the midge, but say any infected ones can still go on biting. And I should say they stop taking meals as it gets colder. So there's a range of temperatures at which point the abundance of midges that are actually taking meals we can identify, and that's where we get into this low vector season that Sascha's just mentioned.
What are the chances if we manage to avoid a full-scale outbreak, if winter comes in time, of it reoccurring in the spring then, given...
So it's the crystal ball, isn't it? I think the ways disease can overwinter are obviously through infectious midges surviving. It's quite unlikely, but theoretically possible. It doesn't pass through the eggs of midges, so we haven't got new midges emerging that will be infectious. So the most likely routes, if we have a reasonable period where there's no vector transmission, it would be newborn calves and lambs, etc., that could be born infectious from an animal that was infected earlier on in their pregnancy. So those are the kind of routes that could reintroduce it. I'll just say that in 2008 also we had the benefit of a vaccine that had been rolled out quite widely, but the low vector period, I'm sure, played a role in that. And looking at newborn animals, particularly in the kind of areas that have been affected, will hopefully help us identify that any that are born infectious to try and stop that spread in a new season. I think whilst we might be able to be lucky and it gets eradicated through that way domestically, at the moment it looks like there's continual threat from Europe, in terms of it's spread through not just the Netherlands, where we think it's probably originally arrived from, but into many of those countries, Denmark, Germany, France, etc. So assuming it survives and re-emerges there as it did in the Netherlands this year, there's always going to be that threat of it being blown over. So we shouldn't be complacent if it doesn't re-emerge in the spring, because there will be further threats, I think, next year. It's only over time that there might be enough natural immunity that this will go through a cycle of not re-emerging. So this is all a bit crystal ball gazing, but those are the kind of factors. Sascha, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think also we need to remember germplasm is also one of those things
Yeah.
that can spread the disease. So you can have infected semen, ovae, or embryos that no one knows about. So that could be infected. So and then those animals get born, like Andy said, and could be infectious.
Thanks for
Equally,
raising that, Sascha.
yeah. So, like there are restrictions, like Andy said initially, for germplasm as well, but for it could equally be that there is frozen germplasm out there that's infected. Hopefully not, because that's why we have our restrictions, but it's always a risk.
Yeah,
And we cannot on that, which makes it very difficult.
yeah, thanks for. I'd say that just hinges back to those points on the controls, that the reason we do have that ban on freezing except under license is so that in those areas where we know we got disease, we get animals tested that are producing germinal products, so that we know the germinal products are produced from animals that weren't infected at the time that product was produced, and that really reduces our risk of disease being reintroduced. I mean, some of these products are kept for many years, so not just next year, but years into the future. So that's a good link into actually why that control's there.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Could you clarify the aim of the restricted zones? Are we just delaying the inevitable?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Could you clarify the aim of the restricted zones? Are we just delaying the inevitable spread, or that's?
Yeah, I understand that. I think if we thought it was just inevitable in a matter of time, I think we probably wouldn't have these zones there. I think there is a belief that these zones are valuable in stopping the spread of disease. So in terms of routes, we have got germinal products we've just talked about. There's midges that can fly, and clearly they can fly a long distance over water, or be blown a long distance over water, should I say. But over land, they tend not to travel that far. They can, but they tend not to travel that far, because clearly the reason they're not landing on the water is they're going to drown, whereas on land they can see another meal. So there's, the incentive for them flying long distance is less. So it's midges are a route of spread, but they may not be a rapid route of spread, particularly now we're getting to the cooler part of the year. So the big concern is moving an infected animal from the infected areas to other parts of the country, because that would be a rapid route of spread. So moving from Norfolk to Cumbria would be a big, very quick jump that could introduce disease into the population there. So that's the reason we've got the controls. It's to try and contain the movement of animals and germinal products, so we don't rapidly move undetected disease around the country. And I think we're kind of lucky at the time of year that this has kicked off, that it is now just starting to become a little bit cooler, which does reduce midge activity as well. So hopefully the rate of spread will be lower than it would have been had it started earlier in the year. So I think that's the main purpose of them. So it's worth.
To add, I think to add, we've done modelling, and it is clear that if we don't have these zones, disease would be really widespread, and if we do have the zones, it does contain it. Also, a lot of animals don't show signs, clinical signs, yet they are infected, and we're seeing that, like we said earlier, was one of the questions, are we picking it up by the surveillance? And we are. And, there's herds there where there's a lot of animals that are positive which haven't shown any signs whatsoever. So they're the silent spreaders, as you can call
them. The restrictions mention all ruminants, including deer. Are there any restrictions on the movement of carcasses of culled wild deer from within the RZ?
No, the virus is spread through biting of live animals, so the carcasses themselves don't present a disease risk. I think in terms of an infected place where we suspect disease, if an animal is suspected of dying from Bluetongue and we don't know it's there and it's being reported in, we'd say, please don't move the carcass until we've had a chance to inspect it. But other than that situation, there's no controls on the movement of carcasses, including wild deer.
Is there a higher risk of sheep getting the virus than cattle? Do you know the ratio of infections reported in cattle to sheep? Apologies for missing.
That's the thing is, cattle are bigger, and they've got a lot more easy accessible skin to bite for midges, whereas sheep are smaller. They often have a big thick wool coat. I don't have any answers on percentages. It also depends on the area of the country you're in and the density of the types of animals there, so that varies, but it is known that we always use cattle as our indicator for disease being around, because they just are prone to probably being bitten quicker by midges than sheep are.
I think also, like you say, there may well be influences whether sheep are shorn or not recently, which can increase access to midges. I was just really going to reflect back on the cases we saw in November 23 in Kent and Norfolk, and actually there was very few sheep when we tested, very few sheep positive. There was a much larger number of cattle, so that would suggest in that particular case the cattle were more susceptible. I'm not sure you can reach that conclusion quantitatively from what we've seen, but that certainly would suggest to me that cattle are more susceptible. But we have to bear in mind the time of year that happened.
You dropped out.
And so yeah, there's no firm evidence, but that does suggest cattle are the right species to target when we're doing surveillance as opposed to sheep.
Okay, Sascha, anything to finish on, or?
No, but I think it's been really helpful having all these questions. It just also helps us also for further communications where things might be unclear again, and we will try and improve what we do. And these webinars have been really helpful. I've had my own vets and technicians come to me saying how good they've been. So thank you for doing this every week. Thank you.
Nothing to add, thanks, Alan.
Alan's frozen.
I think Alan's frozen.
Oh, he's back. You're back now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
No.
I think Alan's frozen, so I'm hoping you might be able to hear me now. It's Amy. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah. Thank you, Sascha and Andy, so much for your time today and for answering all those questions that came through. We really do appreciate your time, and thank you everybody for attending and sending in your questions. Just a reminder that we do have a Q&A section on the Ruminant Health Welfare Bluetongue hub, and there's also a wealth of information on there, so please do visit that hub if you've got anything else that you feel we haven't been able to answer today. And we do really appreciate that this is a really difficult time for farmers out there, and so we wanted to highlight that support is available for you, so please do reach out if you need it, and some of those places that are available, the support that's available, are on the screen now. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll close that webinar there. Thank you.